Look forward and hear what our economist forecasts for the future of the Santa Clarita Valley. Dr. Schniepp provided two updates in March and in June. He has now updated his forecast for the Santa Clarita Valley. Dr. Schniepp's analysis is the only one that specifically evaluates the unique economic and growth dynamics of the Santa Clarita Valley. Dr. Mark Schniepp is director of the California Economic Forecast, which he founded in 1989. He got his PhD from UC Santa Barbara with a focus in econometrics and regional economics. He's an in-depth understanding of the Santa Clarita Valley and how it fits into the greater Los Angeles and California economies. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Mark Schniepp.
Okay, thanks, Holly. Glad to be here. So today, I want to update the previous presentations that I've given and actually emphasize or focus on the Santa Clarita Valley. But first, I want to kind of give an overview of what's going on in California. And I want to start that by saying, or at least talking about what we know now as opposed to what we knew back in April. So currently, we know now that the public health crisis that, of course, that we're in is leading most government decisions, and those decisions subordinate economic issues. And we didn't know that that was going to be the case back in April. The other thing we know is that this is especially true for California. Decisions have been confusing, they've been inconsistent, they've often seemed quite arbitrary. Okay? And the subordination of economic issues and the consequences from that have just lasted so much longer than anyone anticipated. We thought we'd be out of this by the summer months. Well, clearly that has not been the case. More of what we know: the pandemic is not burning itself out like we thought it would. And I think we've come to the realization now that in order to return to a normal state, the virus needs to be eradicated. It's just simply that's got to be the case, given the unrelenting, rightly or wrongly, emphasis on public health issue. Okay, so a therapeutic cure is going to be needed, or a vaccine is going to be needed in order for restrictions, all the restrictions, to be lifted. That's probably the only way that's going to occur. What we didn't know back in April is that by this time we'd have 9 vaccine candidates operating in phase 3 trials. So it's been quite impressive. And a vaccine could be ready as early as October, probably not, but certainly by the end of the year or early in 2021. That's kind of the timeline that is motivating our forecasts right now. We talk about the labor market and the movements that we've seen. The labor market's coming back to life nationwide, and that's after the spring shutdowns. So the unemployment rate has now fallen to 8.4%. But if you adjust for some of the misclassifications that the Bureau of Labor Statistics workers have been making, then it may be as high as 9.1%. Okay, our estimate of the effective unemployment rate, however, is as high as about 11% for the nation right now, and that's based on unemployment claims. California is not keeping up. The labor markets are basically stagnant, principally due to the reversals in the economy that were put in place during the summer months and have really endured until now. In March and April, we had 22 million workers that were laid off or furloughed nationwide. But since May, we've recovered about nearly 11 million of them. They're working again. Okay, but we still have a deficit of about 11.6 million. So we still have a ways to go before we make those up. And in California, we've only recovered about 30% of jobs. The labor markets are stable. There's a lot fewer layoffs now. Unemployment claims are diminishing significantly. So we're seeing things move in the right direction at the national level. But we need a stronger increase in hiring in order to reduce the extremely high rates of unemployment that we have right now. Some of the concerns about the labor markets, well, as I indicated, about half of all jobs have been recovered nationwide, only 30% in California. But the biggest concern is if there's going to be any more layoffs of workers. So that would be due to enforcement of existing restrictions, longer enforcement of them, and furthermore, perhaps even some new restrictions get put in place, and the lack of any new stimulus by Congress to help save households, many of which are clearly struggling right now. In California, we were one of the last states to open up from the spring lockdowns, generally between mid-May and May 25th, with the Bay Area opening up about a week later. And then everybody got excited with the economy opening up. But then cases started increasing in the June and July timeframe. And of course, that prompted the governor ordering business closures again on June 28th and again on July 13th. And during the summer, it was decided to keep all schools closed this fall. Then they were allowed to open with the new blueprint if you got a waiver. But so far, most public schools have never applied for that waiver, choosing to remain closed for most of the fall season. Okay, we still have the fifth highest unemployment rate in the nation among states. We have a disproportionately higher share of unemployment claims, nearly 2.5 times our fair share. And what I mean by that is our fair share in terms of population. We have 12% of the population of the U.S., but we have 28% of the unemployment claims. Job creation in California has lagged most other states. We're still the most locked down state, and the new color-coded blueprint that came out of the governor's office on August 31st for loosening restrictions or even tightening them again is reaffirming the fact that we continue to be the most locked down state. And you can go to a website the New York Times has, and you can view and monitor how all 50 states are either opening or closing or reversing again to see just where we are relative to other states. And we're again the most restrictive at this point in time. Retail stores, salons, barbershops are all open at 25% capacity. Gyms, restaurants, bars closed unless they're outside. All entertainment venues are closed. Schools are closed to in-person instruction. Ditto colleges and universities. And so a lot of this just foregoes a lot of economic activity that we could be seeing in the state right now. We have all non-essential offices or office workers that have to work remotely. That's in place right now. The unemployment rate that we monitor weekly and that we evaluate weekly and compile weekly is currently at around 11% U.S. But for the state of California, we come in, at least as of last week, at about 15.8%. So there has been this divergence that has occurred between the U.S. and California right now. And that's what's motivating the forecast going forward, and certainly affecting also the Santa Clarita Valley or the local economy. So I want to now talk about Santa Clarita for the rest of the talk. During the pandemic, the impact that occurred in March, April, and May when we were shut down was a general net decline of about, closing in on 15,000 jobs in the valley. But since then, the region has clawed back. 3,000 to 4,000 jobs have been recovered. New development has been reinstated, so that's currently ongoing in the residential area and in commercial and industrial. We're not seeing a big calamitous effect on real estate utilization, and I'll talk about that very shortly. The pandemic has had a very uneven impact on the various sectors of the local economy. But then again, it has for the entire nation and state, for that matter. The loss that we estimate for this year, the annual average will come in at about 11,000 workers down. First negative year in quite some time. The distribution of where those losses are is here. No sector has really escaped job consolidation, but finance and real estate pretty much has fared very, very well, has hardly seen any job decline. Same thing with healthcare, for that matter. Some of the larger sectors like manufacturing, there's a little bit more job loss, local government, but again, the lion's share of the impact has really occurred to the leisure and hospitality sector, of which, of course, Magic Mountain is a participant there. So I'll talk about that in a minute. When you look at the distribution of the type of paying jobs in which the pandemic has really impacted, it is the lower paying ones, down about 7,000 jobs, whereas high paying jobs have declined a little bit more than half of that, about 4,000. So that's the uneven distribution effects of the pandemic and how it's affected the valley. Princess Cruises certainly was impacted, and they have announced layoffs of about 1,000 workers, and I think that was in the June timeframe. Unemployment rate for the Santa Clarita Valley is currently at around 14 or 15%. The annual average for the year will probably come in around 13. That's where we are. In the travel industry, let's look at hotel, motel vacancy rates or occupancy rates. In this particular case, a sharp, sudden, precipitous fall in March. We had hit a bottom in April, but you can see that since then, the sector has been slowly working out of it. Occupancy rates are now just eclipsing 50% as of August. So coming back, leisure and hospitality jobs, I talked about that a little bit earlier. They've fallen off a cliff. This is basically your hotels, your motels, and any recreation that's going on in the valley, Magic Mountain, restaurants, and bars. And again, that's the hardest hit sector, responsible for about 1/3 of all job loss, a little bit more than that for that matter. When you look at professional, technical, in the scientific sector, and jobs they're in, hardly impacted at all. This sector was able to avoid many layoffs and furloughs, and a lot of these workers are working from home in these companies. Healthcare employment also, ditto, did not decline much. Henry Mayo certainly announced some layoffs, not many, but many of the other principal firms in this sector have avoided that, and so healthcare has been relatively strong and will continue to be going forward. When you look at all the jobs that use office space, they didn't decline all that much relative to, retail and the leisure hospitality sector. We're down about 2,000 jobs in the office sector. And when you look at office vacancy rates, they have ticked up some going into the third quarter. This is data through August, so it's relatively fresh. So vacancy in the office sector has slowly moved up a little bit higher than it certainly was a couple of quarters ago and a year ago, but it's not at calamitous levels. So again, real estate assets have maintained a relatively strong performance, at least to date, in the valley. Manufacturing employment is down to levels that we haven't seen since about 2013, but nevertheless has held on remarkably well. These are the companies that we've noticed in the state reports that announced layoffs over the last 3 or 4 months in the Santa Clarita Valley. The industrial sector, we've noticed in the third quarter of this year, even going into the second quarter, that vacancy rates for space in the Santa Clarita Valley have ticked up sharply just recently, as you can see, and the vacancy rate is now at about 9.1%. But is that due to the pandemic, or is that due to the fact that there has been significant deliveries of new product in the industrial market? to Santa Clarita just in the last couple of years. When we look at this history, that big spike was Gateway 5 in the IAC Commerce Center. And then recently, Needham Ranch is responsible for most of the run-up. This year, we've seen 900,000 square feet delivered to the market in 14 different buildings. And I think with all that flood of space coming on, and certainly the demand being interrupted by the pandemic, we certainly have higher vacancy rates in industrial, but it will ultimately be absorbed as we recover. When we look at all space under construction from all real estate categories, we've seen a significant amount over time, particularly the last 2-3 years. This year, there's been a respite. It's come down, but that's simply because we've had so many new deliveries. Going forward, the forecast, the outlook for investment going on into non-residential, commercial, and industrial structures is a continuation of the trajectory that we've been on for the last several years during the recovery from the last recession. So we look for a slight interruption this year, but continuing on next year. Remember, construction industry is an essential industry, and it will continue. We're actually already seeing employment almost come back up to the levels it was pre-crisis. Housing production, too, continues in the valley, and it is likely to continue on a much higher path over the next several years. Remember, there's a number of housing projects that are underway, including Valencia, which will deliver thousands of homes going forward. Here's the summary for our real estate market utilization and the office market, the industrial market, the retail market. So we're at 10.2, and that's through August, 9.1 in the industrial market, 5.8 in the retail market. And the apartment market is still quite tight, really hasn't been affected much at all at 4.1%. Average rents continue to rise. Appreciation rate is 3.2% year over year through August of this year. You can see the vacancy rates have been moving in a narrow path for many, many years and currently are very, very low for the third quarter of this year. So again, apartment market's unaffected. And for that matter, the housing market generally unaffected. Median home selling prices have stayed up there, about consistent with where they've been for the last 12 months. And it's interesting to know that in July, we actually saw a breakout, and median selling prices are now at all-time record highs in the Santa Clarita Valley. When I look at home sales monthly, that's the January lows that normally occur because of the seasonality, and then home sales tick up. That's March of this year. But then the pandemic comes along and starts to lower home sales, and we reach a low in May. But interestingly enough, we've seen a resurgence in June and July. So housing market has been very quick to recover, and we don't look for housing to slow anything down in the Santa Clarita Valley, or for that matter, in the rest of the state. So that's been a very resilient sector, needless to say. Let me go through the forecast real quick. My time isn't infinite here, so I want to make sure I cover this. A summary for the U.S. and California. The national economy will continue to recover. Labor markets are going to create more jobs for the rest of this year, but the rate of increase is going to be a lot slower than May, June, July, and August. Okay, because conditions, while they will continue to improve, they won't improve at the alarming rates that we've seen since the lockdowns ended. Many more layoffs will probably be coming in the hotel chains, airlines, and anything travel related, because travel is not going to recover very well this year, and probably going into the first part of next year. It won't be until next summer that we start to see travel really make big strides in recovery. And then the inability for schools to open in California, together with the current very limited business environment for opening, that's going to render the economy really unable to make much new progress towards recovery for the rest of 2020. And it does limit the Santa Clarita Valley as well. Here's our GDP estimates for the nation. We are currently in the third quarter, so we're currently experiencing this huge rebound from the second quarter calamity. So that's where we are, and that'll continue through this month. Then October starts the fourth quarter. We'll see a lot less growth because we won't have as much to cheer about, because most things that are going to be open this year are open now nationwide. That stays in effect for the fourth quarter and the first quarter, and then during the second quarter of next year, we start to pick up significantly as more things are unrestricted and we start to get back to normal. Principal assumptions for California and the Santa Clarita Valley. California economy remains half open, essentially. So where we are now, it's likely to be where it's going to stay. Schools are closed this fall. They're not going to be open. Some private schools are opening. Some private colleges are opening for in-person instruction. But for the most part, the schools are remaining shut. And that limits economic activity in general. Most of the population receives the vaccine, which is ready by either late this year or early in 2021. That's one of our principal presumptions for the forecast. And by the summer of next year, the pandemic ends. Okay, we have to give some kind of a scenario like that. And so we're indicating that restrictions and limitations on the economy will last, probably not to the extent that we're at now, but will last to some extent for another year or so. And then restrictions are limited during quarter two of next year and then completely by 2021. Growth then begins to surge as a wider open economy occurs, and consumers and households are simply going to be less reticent to publicly gather and do all the things that we used to do pre-crisis. So California, which is losing 1.5 million jobs this year, will recover about 700,000 next year and maybe another 600,000 the following year. In Santa Clarita, a similar profile is expected. We'll be down about 11,000 jobs this year, but we'll get about 4,500 back next year, and almost the same the following year. We will recover all jobs almost by the end of 2022, going into 2023. That's the scenario for the local area, given our assumptions. Unemployment rate, which is horrific now, will fall sharply next year and will continue to fall as we make progress during the overall recovery. Construction employment is going to be a major engine of growth for the valley, as will all the new development that is occurring in all real estate markets. So look for that to create all kinds of new job opportunities and new development potential going forward. Mortgage rates are not going to get in the way of housing at all. We're at all-time lows now. We'll continue to remain low in 2021. And even for the next several years, look for mortgage rates to remain around 4%, certainly not much more than that, given the commitments that the Fed has made for keeping the federal funds rate low and the slack that's going to exist in the economy. Home selling values, we just have them continuing along the same trajectory that they've been on for many, many years. So again, the real estate market doesn't really become impacted by this pandemic. It'll take something else to interrupt that going forward. That is the principal forecast. Much of everything that what I've talked about right now is in our new supplemental publication, a supplement to the March forecast that we put out. We know much more now and have a better handle on how things are going to ensue over the next 18 months. So make sure you take a look at that. It's our updated supplement. It's about 5 chapters, at least 36 pages. I'm still writing the executive summary, but it'll be finished today. And it includes the updated forecast in a lot more glory. Okay, that is the overall outlook for the Santa Clarita Valley. And we hope to meet again next year, but that time in person. So thank you. Holly?
Thanks, Mark. And you're right. We absolutely hope that we are having a in-person meeting next year, which raises an interesting question. LA is so dependent on tourism and related events, and SoFi Stadium and the Rams' first game was done without any spectators. How does that play into the forecast for the LA region?
It's huge, but then again, it plays into the forecast for all regions, right? Because those same things are prohibited everywhere. So and that's one of the reasons that the forecast for California isn't great. But if we can retrieve about half of all next year to a wide open economy, you're going to see some very impressive growth, and you'll see a surge. But the first half is not going to be very good. So and unless we can expedite the vaccine dissemination and we can get the economy opened up sooner, we're certainly assuming that we're going to be closed down probably through the spring, but to some extent. But if we can get things moving faster, and I guess things are moving at warp speed with respect to the vaccine, then look for a much better year in 2021. But you're right. All of those things that are limited now is what's playing into the fact that we're going to have a very unimpressive rest of this year.
You talked about how the jobs are coming back. I mean, some portion of what was lost. How much of that is due to the fiscal stimulus that was done versus and spending associated with that? And what do you think is the long-term prognosis because we have incurred so much debt?
Uh, Certainly, the stimulus provided households with a lot of wherewithal, provided a lot of unemployed with wherewithal. They were out spending; they had to. So yes, that provided some job creation, and so with that all came to an abrupt halt at the end of August. So we're waiting to see if Congress initiates another stimulus that could slow down and likely will slow down employment gains. And so we've incorporated that into our forecast for national employment creation over the next 3 or 4 months, because I don't know that we're going to get another stimulus. So it does impact that. And that's one of the reasons why things don't grow as fast and the GDP forecast isn't as great. But what your other question was in response to?
Well, in order to generate that stimulus, we increased our government spending dramatically.
Right.
People are asking about what the long-term consequence of that is.
Well, I think the key word is what you said. It tends to be a longer term consequence. So right now, I don't think anyone is focusing on the fact that we've increased significant debt, and I don't think we necessarily need to be talking about that. That's one of those cans you can continue to kick down the road and worry about that later. Right now, I think the important issue is getting the unemployment down and getting the economy going again, and then we can worry about the debt issue in 2023, 2024. But you're right, it becomes a problem at that point in time. So we're either going to need to address that with reducing government spending significantly, or increasing taxation, or causing the economy to grow so fast that we increase overall revenues for government significantly. But again, those are policies that will initiate probably after we end this pandemic, and it looks like the recovery is going to be solid again.
And then you've talked about the role that development and construction plays. There's going to be a lot of jobs there for the Santa Clarita Valley. How does that position us relative to other parts in Southern California, the state, and the nation?
uh, just like it has for the last several years. It's positioning Santa Clarita so that it will become a growth magnet going forward. So look for all that new development to bring in all new companies, new employees, new populations, new housing that will produce significant economic stimulus for the region. And the growth of Santa Clarita will be miles ahead of so many other areas. We are seeing development booms in other markets in California. And so you're going to continue to see overall growth in California pick up, but it'll be spotty and by different regions. Certainly Santa Clarita will be much more competitive in that respect.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you always for your insights and picking up on the presentations you've done previously. It's always great to hear from you.
I'm sure. Thank you, and looking forward to the next one. Bye, Holly.
Dr. Schniepp's updated forecast will be available for download on the SCV EDC website. I want to once again thank our presenters for their time today. Throughout the event, our sponsors have been shown on the screen.